What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 3 live stream for the PGA Championship. Going to go through what you need to know for DFS and props tomorrow. Make sure you can go out there and have yourself a moving day. But first off, what a day we had here on Friday. We had Scotty getting arrested early. Overall, pretty solid showdown day. Was a little bit worried about my 50% on Scotty, but hey, he went out there and nuked after being in a literal jail cell. More so just happy that he got back out there to the tournament and that we have an absolutely stacked leaderboard heading into the weekend. So I think it's shaping up to be one of the better majors that we've had lately. We've got narrative galore up there, right? Xander, can he hold it off for his first major? You've got Schauffele up there. Like I said, you also got Brooks go out there at like -7 at the stage. Hell, Bryson having a good week too. It's shaping up like a good weekend. So hopefully you're having a solid Friday yourself and are ready to talk a little bit of golf down there in chat. We got Ross down there who says the field couldn't detain Scotty long enough, which is kind of crazy, right? That was the one chance for the field to get rid of him. And no Teddy Scott tomorrow, but that's not going to keep him from having that top finish. So what's going on, Philly? What's going on, Big Two? Time to run it back. Yeah, it's been 2 really good prop days in a row. Showdown today was a little hit or miss. I wish I was heavier on the PM wave than I was, but props was about a 20-unit day in terms of profit. And then day 1, we had over a 10-unit day there too. So I have more than paid for my exposure this week, plus some, just with our props so far. So, let's keep it going. What's going on, James? What's going on? The Peach, heck of a day again, of course. What's going on, Michael? What's going on, Paul? Hopefully you guys are having a solid evening. And I agree with you, Paul. Hovland does have some of his forward back. But before we hop into this, let's go ahead and shout out our sponsor for the live stream, which we have a new code for, a new promo code over there on Ship It Nation. I don't have the new graphic from them just yet, but the new code is going to be Luke10 for a discount off any membership over there. So, of course, right, we cover all the golf stuff over here, but for all of that analysis for a variety of different fantasy sports, make sure to check out the Ship It Nation. You can see they're covering everything for the NBA playoffs right now. You've also got the NHL playoffs, right, being covered over there. We got an MMA slate tomorrow, NFL when it comes back. And of course, they're covering a lot of golf stuff themselves. So like I said, right, they've been a partner here a long time. This code is changing up. It's going to be Luke10 for 10% off any discount or any membership over there in terms of a discount. And make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But let's talk about this golf course, which, like I said, today played a little bit weird. So, and by weird, I mean the PM played easier than the morning. While that happened in round 1, it was only about a 0.1 shot difference. Today, it was over a shot difference between the two waves. You can see the PM actually played under par, about 0.66 under, whereas the morning wave played over par like we had in round 1. All of that was because of the rain, right? That was persistent throughout pretty much the entire AM wave. And because they were playing in the rain, golf course played longer. You, of course, had a lot of the water balls that you'll get in that kind of conditions. And also, I would say the chipping and putting was maybe a little bit more difficult too. So, as per usual, right, playing in the rain can be a little bit of a nuisance, but playing after the rain, right, especially with calm conditions, can lead to really good scoring out there. So that's what we got. That was kind of hard to read based on the forecast, right? Some forecasts were calling for morning rain, but a lot of them had it scattered throughout the entire day. So I found it hard to really commit to taking all my PM guys. But if I had, right, I obviously thought that there was a chance that the PM guys would go off. That's why we played so many of them in our player pool. But I wish I had gone like 60, maybe even 70% on that sort of wave. So obviously, right, hindsight's 2020. It's easy to say that after the fact. But what's important to know going into Saturday is that they are going to have it in 2 sums off of hole number 1. So they don't have tee times posted because, of course, the round hasn't ended. Technically, the cut hasn't gone through yet. But you'll see up here that they're going to have 2 sums going off of hole number 1 starting at 9 a.m. So you can see they tried to make it as clear as possible, right? They said groups of 2, right? So there's no threesomes out there for tomorrow and only going off of hole number 1. So that's going to spread out the tee times, right? Your leaders are going to be going off last. Your players that just made the cut are going to be going off first. And though the weather forecast isn't calling for a really big weather edge, you can at least know that some of the morning starters are going to have slightly better conditions, and some of your later starters are still going to have solid conditions themselves. So in the morning, right next to no wind, but you can see that persist for much of the day. So even in the PM hours, right? It's getting up to like at most like 7-8 miles an hour. And though it's going to be baking out as the day goes on, right? That rain that came today, right, is going to soften up this golf course early. By the afternoon, right, it'll be a little bit firmer and faster, but I still think it'll be a relatively easy golf course. So if you're trying to find a stack like today, right, it's not going to happen, right? A lot of that was just because the rain actually coming down during the morning wave. But for tomorrow with clear skies, right, relatively low winds the entire time, I think it's going to be a relatively flat scoring average. Now, I do think that the morning wave might have slightly better conditions for a ceiling round because they'll have the more pristine greens, right, flatter greens, no bumps, imperfections on them after they do the cuts and rolling overnight. And also, probably going to have more receptive greens, right? Because that evaporation isn't going to take place. So if we're trying to split hairs, right, maybe choose between two players, try and break a tie, that sort of thing, then maybe you go out there and you take that AM wave player. But as you'll see with the plays that we go through here soon, I have a lot of guys that are starting in the middle or even the later half of the pack. So I wouldn't really lean into one wave or the other unless you're just trying to go for correlation, because at least based on the forecast that we have right now, it doesn't look like we're going to get that big differential when it comes to the weather forecast. So it's worth noting, once again, right, two sums off of hole number one, which is clutch from the viewing perspective, right? We don't want three sums. We don't want an absolute clusterfuck happening out there in the golf course. With them spreading out the tee times, right, giving us golf throughout the entire day, I think that's a huge plus for us from the viewing perspective. So let's go ahead, bring up our projections. I'm going to keep this going along rather quickly, guys, as I have a migraine right now. I'm trying to hide it as best as humanly possible, but this light, like from this ring light over here, is making my head absolutely throb. So I'm going to do my best to get through this in like 20-25 minutes. So if it seems like I'm going a little bit faster than normal, that's going to be why. Just a long day, right? A lot's gone on today, and I'm not normally up at like 6-7 a.m. And because of that news, I was wired up there at 6, and it's already like midnight. So yeah, your boy's running on fumes right now. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on, and then talk about some of my top plays. And like I said, there's not really a weather edge to talk about, so it's all going to be about game theory, right? Making sure that we're taking guys that are relatively low owned. If you're going to take a piece of chalk or two, that's fine, but we need to get an ownership pivot, right? We need to be taking guys that are relatively low owned because we don't have that weather edge to lean into, right? And if you're going to try and make this a plus EV hobby, right? If you're going to try and go out there and actually win money playing DFS, you probably want to go out there and take some low-owned pivots. What's going on? Rory, too far back. To win, I don't know about that, right? He could go nuclear out there. So I wouldn't say he's too far back to win, but you know, he's definitely got to go off to get into contention. What's going on, Nate? Kep says, who's the bounce back guy for tomorrow? We'll see. We'll circle back on that one. It is the cut locked in at -1. It is. So I think technically there's a chance that it could move, but in terms of statistical chance, it's pretty much 0.0. You can see over here on the data golf model, right? They have it at 99.8%. I would be absolutely mind blown if it moved. So just to give you an idea, right, it's top 70 in ties that makes the weekend. For it to move, you'd have to have Zach Blair birdie, also this Ben Polland guy birdie. And then down here, you'd have to have one of these two guys shoot 2 under par, right? Their last few holes. And what you've got to realize, right, is that these are some of your scrubs, right? A lot of these are your club pro sort of players. And even if they were PGA Tour, like elite level players, I'd have a hard time thinking that many of them are going to go out there and shoot under par. So technically not locked in. You need 4 guys to get to -2. So you'd need these 2 to birdie, and then you'd need both of these guys at even par to also go out there and shoot -2. I guess in theory, right, Valimaki, Whiting could go out there and shoot 3 under their last 3-4 holes. But yeah, it's pretty much locked in to that -1 score. And I just realized I was on another tab looking at the leaderboard, but yeah, it's pretty much locked in. Yeah, we're going to talk underdog later. So we're talking DFS now. We'll talk props later. Ross says, Rory double bogeying from the middle of the fairway. Sure as shit didn't help. Yeah, that's why I'm playing him today, right? I obviously avoided him for Showdown yesterday. I'll go back to him, though, right? $11,400, relatively low owned. He played a lot better than the scorecard would indicate. And part of that was putting, right? He didn't capitalize on a lot of his 10 to 20 footers. You can see the same thing about Brooks, right? It's also why I'm playing him, right? Out there for Saturday. He had, I believe it was 5 putts of sub 6 feet that he didn't capitalize on, right? And he still went out there, shot 3 under par, still went out there, I believe had 8 birdies on the round, right? So if you can make 8 birdies and miss that many, right, from sub 6 feet, right? Imagine if he had his putter today, right? Even if he was just making the routine putts from 6 feet and in, right? Brooks shoots like -8 today, maybe even like -9. He had that type of round out there with the ball striking. Rory McIlroy, outside of a few small mistakes, right, also had a pretty solid round of golf himself. So yeah, I think those are the good bounce back guys, right? The ones that just made like really obvious errors, that's not likely to happen again, right? Like from 120 out, like you're saying, like how many times does somebody double bogey in that kind of circumstance? That really, changes the perception on players, right? Obviously his score is -5 now as opposed to -7. If he was -7, it'd be 20% plus owned, right? Out there for tomorrow. You have guys like Scotty, Xander at like 25, maybe 30% ownership. All because of the scorecard out there, right? So yeah, I think there's a little bit of value in taking guys like that because they played better than you would really think. You wouldn't count out Otwegi either. Yeah, he's even par or something like that. Let's see, where's he at? Yeah, he's even par there with Mendoza. Yeah, I would say that he's not a club pro, right? So he could technically get into the cut line. He also has 18 left, so I could definitely see him getting to -1. But all these guys would have to shoot -1 to make it to. You have to shoot -2 with Otwegi. Same thing with Kyle Mendoza, and then you'd have to have those guys at -1 all shoot right under par. That's what I mean, right? I'm not so much talking shit about guys. It's just saying it's very unlikely that the cut would move. Going on. Do I know what the 6 of 6 percentage is? Yeah, it's like 9.3%. So that would be for your like largest field GPP, like the big 20 max. It'll change from contest to contest. So especially like single entries, it'll vary quite a bit. But your $5 single entry, I believe it's like right around 8, maybe 9% too. So most of your GPPs will be around that, but some of them higher or lower depending on who people took. So let's talk about a few more plays. So, we talked about Rory Brooks a little bit already. I guess we'll go past them. Or I'm going to go through this a lot quicker than normal because my head really hurts. So I'm just going to talk about, players that I like, and you'll get an idea here, right? Most of them are low owned. I have guys that I'm playing at higher ownership like Brooks and Rory. We're going to say the same thing about Justin Thomas, right? I'm taking him at some ownership, right? 15.6%. But literally everyone else is a pivot, right? So, normally I spend a lot of time talking about lineup construction and whatnot. When you're taking so many pivots, right, your line of construction's done for you, right? If you have pivots at like 4 or 5 of your spots in almost every single lineup, you're going to have no issues in terms of leverage going out there and getting unique when it comes to your build, right? Making sure you're not duplicating yourself with a bunch of people out there in those large field contests. So if I seem just more focused on the actual players and why I'm taking them, that's why, right? Because these are all pivots. Mix them into lineups if you want to, right? If you have a bunch of pivots in your player pool, you can probably build pretty simple lineups right out there for Saturday. So Joaquin Niemann, 6.9% owned, has been unbelievable with the irons. He's actually been one of the best iron players that made the cut, but cannot make a putt for his life. So I believe today lost like 3 strokes putting, might have been even more than that when it came to the shots gained putting. So as somebody at $9,100 that's going off early, going to have those receptive conditions there in the morning hours, I like that quite a bit when it comes to his upside. So $9,100, I think a player that's going to give you plenty of leverage at about 7% ownership, and it also has that upside. JT is playing a lot better than the scorecard, and he's still -6 at this stage, so squarely in contention right after the first 2 rounds. And JT not really getting much done with the putter, right? Kind of like Brooks, had plenty of those sub 10-foot putts that he just didn't capitalize on here on Friday. And it was the same story out there Thursday. So if you're looking for a player that's kind of due for more to drop, it's the Brooks Koepkas, the Justin Thomases of the world. And given that both players are top tier ball strikers, in fact, right, top 5 ball strikers for my money out there in the world, right, especially at the peak of their powers, right? JT probably not right now, but last 2-3 years, certainly, right? JT is one of those top 5 ball strikers. Those kind of players, I trust to keep that going. They've just got to get some magic out there with the flat stick. So, those are the sort of guys that I'll tail as opposed to somebody that's kind of luck sacking it over the first few days. I like Terrell Hatton, another player that's been good with the ball striking, but just can't get a putt to drop. And considering Hatton's a really top tier putter, very consistent putter out there with that flat stick, definitely due for a little bit of regression in that category, right? You think that he'd be due to kind of get back to his baseline, which is a top, if not an elite tier putter, which normally results in ceiling rounds, right? When Terrell Hatton goes out there and gains with the flat stick, he shoots like 7-8 under par. And those are the kind of rounds that you're going to have for Showdown if he ends up having that ceiling Gooch at 5.2%, just low-owned guy in the 7K range, right? Early tee time. I think that helps, especially a really good iron player like Gooch out, right? When you're going to have those more receptive conditions, especially after a day of rain, somebody like Gooch, if he gets hot with that iron play, can go super low. And he's also a really good putter. I think that's something that people don't talk about enough with Gooch, is he's kind of like a Sam Ryder that is just a little bit more consistent. Stud iron player, stud putter, but decent off the tee and decent around the green, right? So he's much better than a Ryder when it comes to both of those categories, which is why you see him in contention on Live pretty much every single week. Kurt Kitayama at -4, more of like a mid to later starter. So certainly, right, not that AM narrative that we're going with, but a player that's been hitting the ball really well over the first few days. So kind of like a JT, right? And Kurt Kitayama's kind of known for that ball striking. Those are the kind of guys that I'll look to, right, to kind of keep that going over the weekend. Down here at the bottom end of the sevens, Tom Hoge, really good approach numbers over the first few rounds. He's also only 6.6% owned. Eric Van Rooyen, he still hasn't finished his round, so I guess we got to kind of keep an eye on that, right, and make sure that he's actually playing for moving day. But I have him at sub 5% ownership a lot because of the fact that he hasn't finished his round. Ball striking the living crap out of it to this stage, and is a high upside player I love for showdown formats. Rasmus Højgaard, same thing, right? Long off the tee, been hitting the ball well over the first few days, and he's sub 5% owned. He's at -2, so relatively early tee time. Just a high upside player that I'm looking to get to for showdown. And then the last player we'll talk about is his brother, right? So we've got Rasmus up here. We've got Nikolai down here at $6,600. And the fact that Nikolai is $6,600 is just purely disrespectful. He's at least like a $7,500 even in this kind of field. I mean, he was in contention at the Masters, right? Obviously not a contention quite, right, at this sort of event, but still made the cut. And if you take a look at his approach stats, he's one of the top 10 approach players in this field, right, despite making the cut on the number. So obviously, I think due for a little bit of regression when it comes to the flat stick. And kind of like Rasmus, these aren't guys that, never gain with the putter, right? They're pretty decent putters. They're spike putters that go out there and have those ceiling rounds. It's something that I've noticed, and especially if you watch the DP World Tour, is a lot of times these guys will go off on the same round, right? They're twins if you didn't know, right? These two, Rasmus and Nikolai. And for whatever reason, a lot of times they compete on the same week and get into contention at the same time. And it's even happened where one's been playing one tour and one's been playing another tour, and they nearly won on the same week. In fact, they may have actually had wins out there on the same week. I wouldn't put it past them to go out there and both have a ceiling round at the same time. So I'm going to have a few lineups of the Højgaard start, obviously going for that correlation, but it's just something that I've noticed, right? Obviously, there's sometimes pairings that end up doing well. Maybe it's something with their biorhythms. If they go out there and wake up on a certain day and feel better, certain week, right? They go out there and for whatever reason, they're just set up for success. I'm not a believer in all that hoorah, all that crap out there, but I've seen people that have talked about the trends with these two, and it's definitely a thing to keep track of. So those are all the plays I wanted to talk up. Like I said, I was going to go through it a little bit quicker than normal. But what you'll notice, right, is that outside of Rory Brooks, the only chalky guy we talked up here was Justin Thomas. And it's not for no reason, right? Obviously, these aren't the only guys that I'm taking. Everything that's blacked out can be found over there on my Patreon page. And if you're on there, you had access to the spreadsheet. You'd see that my player pool is really pivot heavy, right? In terms of chalky plays, let me just go through this. There's 1, 2, maybe 3 guys, $8,000 plus that I'm taking at over 15% that I don't have on here, right, as a play on this live stream. And then outside of that, it's all pivots, right, especially in that 6 and 7K range. So that's how I handle a lot of my showdown slates, right? It's all about going out there and getting a ceiling performance. And without placement points for round 3, a lot of the guys like Scotty, right, Xander, a Colin Morikawa, that are all super high owned for round 3 showdown, I'll fade, right? It's not like I expect them to play horribly. It's just that they're sometimes double the ownership of the guys around them, and they don't have double the optimal percentage when it comes to their simulated hit rates. So those sort of plays, I think, are just guys that in general, you'd probably want to avoid for round 3. Now, it doesn't mean you have to avoid a Xander, a Morikawa, a Schauffele, right? I think there's a good chance that one of those 3 could go off tomorrow. It's that you probably shouldn't be playing all 3 of them right out there in your player pool. It would just be a little bit of a chalky start. I'm playing none of them. I'll just tell you right now, I'm fading all of those players out there, which is a little bit of risky business. Obviously it makes you a little bit nervous when you're fading 3 players that are of that quality, but to have a successful showdown slate, right, when you don't have a weather edge, you've got to be bold and you've got to lean into that game theory side. So that's what I'm doing. I'm choosing to be bold about it because we don't have that weather to really lean on. And that's how I'm choosing to go out there and play it Friday. Let's catch up on any questions. Then we're going to talk props. I'm not going to build a lineup with you guys because, again, I'm trying to get this thing moving. My head hurts really bad. Try not to complain about it too much. Yeah, we'll do pick 6 later. So the restart is at 9. Yeah, no, not the restart. The actual round starts at 9. So restart, I believe, is at 7 a.m. So they'll get them out there. Probably only take like 30 minutes to an hour to finish the round. And then they'll have 30 minutes to, I guess, set up the groups. You'll get that tweeted out at some stage, and then they'll start it at 9. Any thoughts on Gim? Not sure. Honestly, the shots gained metrics are kind of all over the place for Doug Gim. He's not somebody that's really doing it in any one category. So if we go ahead and check on that real quick, I'll give you an idea of exactly what that looks like. So Doug Gim, right, he's gaining mostly off the tee, actually, right, about a stroke and a half per round there. And then everything else has been very average. So I don't know. I don't really have a take on him. I'd say I'm like a 6 out of 10 on him because he is gaining to this point, right? He's -5 over the first few days. But I'm also not overly enthralled with what he's doing, right? Obviously, the off the tee stuff is great to see, but 0.92 shots gained approach is it's not stuff that really moves the needle for me. All right, let's keep this going with props. So let me go ahead, bring up my prop averages from today, which I was able to calculate just before we went live. And then we'll try and find a slip or two to enter. I haven't entered anything quite yet myself, and we'll find something to enter here. So let me see, 1 second. So these should be the prop averages. There we go. Let me blow it up a little bit, and I'll bring it up for you guys to see on your end. Of course, guys, like I said, if you want to see all of the slips that I'm entering, if you want to see all of the stuff that was blacked out on that spreadsheet over there for the DFS side, make sure to check out the Patreon page. There's a link down below in the description of this video. So in terms of the prop averages from today, I just took them from the PM wave because I think the morning wave is kind of useless. Morning wave played much harder, right? It was during a rainstorm, for goodness sakes. So if we're looking at those for what looks like a clear day out there for Saturday, that's just probably not doing us any good. So up here towards the top with strokes, birdies, and bogeys, these are only from the PM wave golfers. And then I don't have a good way to separate it by AM, PM. I'm out there for fairways and greens. So these are unfortunately out there for the entire field. So the field average for fairways, 9.21. Greens and reg was 11.23. And then for the stats only from the PM wave, which again, these are the most relevant stats for what we're going to see out there for tomorrow, was -0.66 for scoring average, birdie average 3.87, and then the bogey average you can see here is 2.78 per round. So significantly easier than what we had for the day before. And now that a lot of the club pros are out of there, right, guys like Rich Beam, John Daly, right, withdrew, right, he's no longer going to be included in the scoring averages. This is probably going to get even better than what we had for today. So low winds, going to be receptive still after all the rain that they got, especially if they give them super easy pin locations because it's moving day. This place is going to get torn up. But unfortunately, they have not posted pins because the round has not ended quite yet. So we're not going to have that to look at quite yet. So in terms of what I'm expecting, probably something around 1, maybe even a stroke and a half under par for the scoring average. Birdie average is probably over 4 per round, maybe even close to 4.5. I'd say that the bogey average is probably closer to 2.5 per round. So like I said, maybe even a stroke and a half under par for a scoring average, which at a major championship is just something that we never see. This golf course is getting torched right even at a relatively long length just because of how soft it's playing, right? And how calm the weather has been. And it will be out there for Saturday. So let's bring up Underdog. Let's bring up prize picks and figure out what we're going to do. And I'll bring up pick 6 as well, because I know somebody was mentioning that. So let's actually start with pick 6. I'll bring it up here. They've got some guys at 5.5, 4.5 for a majority of the field. Let me look at the strokes. So strokes starts at 70.5 and goes the whole way down to 67.5. So that's a pretty tight pricing if you'd ask me. Let's go over here to Underdog. I know it looks pretty similar. In fact, their strokes lines are even lower from some of your top tier players. So you can see they have Scotty at 66.5. And then prize picks is a little bit more similar to what we had on pick 6, right? They have them going down to 67.5, but the only guy they have there, right, would be a Scotty Scheffler. And then your highest projections outside of these PGA professionals, right, like Wells and Shattuck, are here at 70, maybe 70 and a half for some of the players down low. So I would say that the most optimistic board, right, would be Underdog. Your next most optimistic would probably be Prize Picks. And then if you're trying to find some value, believe it or not, it's probably on this pick 6 board. And by value, I mean for like overs in terms of birdies or better. So just like to give you an example, right? Like you can get Bryson at 4.5 birdies on Prize Picks. He might be at 5. Yeah, he's actually up here at 5 already. And then over here on the Underdog side, I'm pretty sure he's also over here at 5 birdies. So I think usually this site is the most optimistic of the bunch over here on pick 6, but out here for moving day, they're probably the most reasonable of the bunch, at least of what we looked at so far. So you've got Hovland at that number. You also have Homa at that same kind of projection. I'm just kind of spitballing right now and throwing out a few ideas. I'd also potentially take a Cam Smith over at 4 birdies, 4.5 birdies. These sort of players, I think, are all at 5, or a majority of them are at 5 birdies over here on Prize Picks. So let's see. So Hovland isn't, Homa also isn't, right? They're at 4.5. Same thing with Cam and Joaquin Niemann. So actually, I don't hate them regardless, right? I would still take these props. You'd probably consider taking them over here on the Prize Pick side too. Main reason for that, right? I think these conditions, these pins are going to lead to a lot of birdies. And now that you have those club pros out of there, I think we see at least like a 4.1, 4.2 birdie average. If not, if all conditions cooperate, right? And if pins truly are easier out there, maybe close to the 4.5 birdie mark out there. And if it's going to be a 4.5 birdie average, right? Guys like Hovland, Homa, etc., right? A lot of the guys we had here in our pick 6 slip would be guys I'd be hammering for the overs if that's going to be the field average. So just for the sake of this, I'm going to leave it to some of my favorite options, which we're going to go with Bryson and Joaquin Niemann for the overs on birdies. 2 players that just can really fill it up, especially when it comes to birdies. And then I'm going to take an under on strokes. So I'm just going to try and find somebody that makes sense here. So it's 69.5. If we can find like a borderline elite tier player, like a Tom Kim, for example, I think that might work. But yeah, 70.5, a bunch of guys I probably won't want to take. And let's see what they have Tom Kim at for strokes. Tom Kim is at that same number there. And then what is he at over here on Underdog? He's at 69 strokes, so a little bit lower. So I don't hate that. We'll leave that in the shopping cart for right now. At 69, yeah, there's not really anyone else I would love to take. So my favorite props by far that you have over here on the pick 6 are these birdie or better props. Like some of these guys at 4.5 that you could take an over on. If there's any prop that I would build around on that site, it would be this Bryson DeChambeau birdies or better prop. In terms of what we're going to take on Underdog, I think we're going to go there last. Just because their board is probably going to be all fades. They have these props, in my opinion, just way too optimistic. Over here on Prize Picks, I think we have a little bit more leeway. So I already mentioned taking a look at like the Hovland over, right? Potentially taking a look at this Max Homa over. Some of these guys that they have in 4.5, like a Cam Smith, right? That you could potentially mix in. In fact, this might be a little 3-man that I end up mixing in out here for Saturday. So let me see if there's anyone else that I'd prefer. I kind of like the idea of JT. So let's potentially take Cam Smith out and go with JT instead. And then you have a bunch of guys up for birdie. So that's good to see. At least there's a good option or a good selection over here on Prize Picks. Let me peek at these greens. So 12.5 for most players, 13.5 for Scotty. That makes sense. Fairway average is about 9.2 today. Or I'll just give you the exact number, right? 9.21 out there for today. So this kind of board, for the most part, looks pretty accurate. So yeah, greens and reg, fairways, probably not my favorite. We already looked through the birdie board first. Let me scan this strokes board for any glaring misprices. Which, speaking of, let me get some water while I do so. Now, I think it's going to be like a 1.5 under par scoring average, right? So, and that would be at best. So probably closer to 1 under par is a little bit more reasonable. If it plays 1 under par, that's 70 strokes, right? So somebody at 69.5, for example, like a Jordan Spieth, like a Minwoo, like a Taylor Gooch, they've got to go out there and gain about a stroke to the field to go out there and cover that. which is a pretty reasonable thing to ask them for. Now, these guys at 69, 68.5, right? They've got to go out there and gain a full 2 strokes to the field to cover, which is, in my opinion, a little bit more difficult to get done. So if I was going to take anybody, right, to shoot something like -2, -3, right, I'd prefer it to be somebody like rather than taking a 69 strokes, right? Somebody that has that push equity, I'd rather just go for 69.5 and take an under. So this board, in my opinion, it's pretty tight when it comes to the strokes. I think it's pretty accurate for the most part. I think the most value that we're going to find right now is on these birdies. So I'm going to do a little bit of cross-reference before I commit to playing anything here. So let me bring up Draftkings. Let me bring up Caesars and William Hill and do a little bit of line shopping. So I believe they might have. So DraftKings doesn't quite have them up yet, but if I was a betting man, I am. All right, Caesars probably has them up themselves, and we might be able to find something over there on FanDuel too. So just one second. And we're not going to spend a ton of time looking at these. I just want to see if they have something up for reference. Let's see. All right, so nothing posted on FanDuel yet. Round hasn't ended, so that's probably why. And Caesars, see, I was a betting man and I was wrong, right? Does not have them posted either. So that's a byproduct of the fact that they still haven't made the cut, right? That creates a little bit of complications. And when you're going through and doing that, so that kind of sucks. We're not going to be able to do that to go out there and make our picks. But I would be leaning these as of right now. So like I said, I'm not going to spend all night here at this live stream just because of how I'm feeling right now. But these would be the 3 leans that I'm going with. Not sure I'm going to commit to them for a slip quite yet. But definitely 3 props that I'll be highly considering out here this evening. And then let's go over here to Underdog. So for Underdog, we're trying to find potential fades here because, you know, if there's a spot to bet against players, it's on Underdog, right? These lines are lower than what you have on your competitors. Just as an example, right, Will Zalatoris. It's not like I want to pick on him for a fade, but to do a comparison, right, he's 68.5 strokes. I believe he's 69.5 over here on Prize Picks. So let me just double check on that real quick. He's actually only at 69 strokes, but right, still that 0.5 discrepancy. And if you look across the board, it's pretty much like that for every player. So to give you an idea, right, JT's at 68 on Underdog, right? He's at 69 on Prize Picks. I think the more accurate projections here, right, especially if I thought this was a tight board, right, is Prize Picks, right? I think that these are the more accurate projections. So at least as of my first lean right now, right, I think that these birdie props make some sense, right? I really like this Bryson prop. It's by far the favorite thing that I've seen so far. The best value, especially if you're like going based on like the likely sportsbook numbers, if you're just doing it based on projection, are fades on Underdog. These are probably the highest hit rate props that we can find. So what we want to find here are just glaring misprices, right? So like, for example, right, Brooks is at 5.5 birdies. Over here on Prize Picks, right, he's at 5 birdies, right? So that's another 0.5 discrepancy. You got to try and target the right players for fades, right? Because fading guys like Brooks, Rory, Scotty Scheffler, I think is like the perfect example. It is about as dumb idea as you can have, right? These guys at majors are going to go out there and pop off. It's more so trying to find some of your scrubs that kind of choke. So for example, Brian Harmon, probably not always a major killer. Now he has a major to his name, but at these longer tracks, right, doesn't always have his best stuff, right? Just look at round 1 for an example of that. Jason Day, I think a potential fade. Ricky Fowler, right? A player that we could look at for a fade over there too. So I'm not sure if we're actually going to commit to taking any slips here on live stream, just because my brain's not working at full functionality right now, if I'm being quite honest, out there with the migraine I'm dealing with. But let me try and give you guys a few leans at the very least that you can look at. Just kind of going through these bogey lines also seem low, right? 1.5 is in my opinion, way too low. Now, the bogey average was certainly lower out there in the PM wave today, but it was still 2.78, right? And it's going to improve as some of the PGA professionals have missed the cut. Some of the guys that are just out of form, but I can't see it going to like under 2 per round, right? It's going to be at least 2 bogeys per round for the field average. So, you know, Brooks is definitely not the guy to be fading, right? He might go over, all we know, but he's probably not the best bet, right, to take for an over on bogeys. If we can find a, you know, more erratic player at 1.5 bogeys, like I'd be all over that, or even 2 bogeys I'd consider taking an over on. on an especially erratic player. Let's see. So if Hovland didn't have that multiplier, I would probably consider him for one of those fades. But let's see what we got. Sahith. He's playing well this week, though. So maybe we just let him do his thing out there. Yeah, the idea here, though, is that like all these lines are probably a little bit too optimistic. So if you can find the right guys to fade, I think it makes some sense. Now, a way that we could do this, right, is sort this by score and then try and find some of the guys that are luck sacking it with their putter and maybe around the green. So if we're doing that, let's see who's not gaining with their approach play. So in terms of guys up top that are maybe not hitting the ball as well, or especially didn't hit the ball well today, you had guys like Brooks actually didn't hit the ball well today, which is kind of surprising. Lucas Herbert. Let's do this over the first 2 days so we can look at it that way. So you can see, right, Koepka obviously had a good first round, right, so kind of makes up for that. Guys, though, that over the first 2 days have not been doing it that well. Lucas Herbert now, unfortunately, doesn't have lines that we can take. Doug Gim not playing that well. Shane Lowry. Shane Lowry screwed me today. So I'm not going to fade him because if I do that, he'll end up having a really good round just to screw me again. But let's find somebody else that we could fade. Minwoo, I think, is a really good option. He's kind of luck sacking it over the first few days. Cam Smith is kind of doing that too, but that's kind of what Cam Smith does. Minwoo kind of does that too, though. So I guess if I'm going to say that about Cam Smith, I should probably say that about Minwoo too. See Jesper Svensson. Let's just sort this by approach play and look at guys that made the cut. So your worst iron player that made the cut is the Shattuck guy, who obviously doesn't have lines for. EVR doesn't have lines posted on either site. None of these guys do. So the worst iron player that we could bet against would be Ricky Fowler, right? You can see that's losing on approach and doing it all around the green and all off the tee, which, by the way, his around the green is pretty good, like okay. But his best stat being off the tee, right, is not very repeatable. He's not the best off the tee player. So based on what we're looking at there, I think the best fade would be a Ricky Fowler, right? So let me type Rick in here, and let's find the best category to do this with. So I just want to do some cross comparison. Let's see what his strokes line is over here on Prize Picks, which I'm assuming he has one. I probably just skipped past it when I was going through it here. So let's see. So Ricky Fowler, yeah, they have him at 70 strokes, right? He's at what, 69.5 over here in Underdog. So if you were going to bet against him, I think, right, taking like an over on strokes would make sense. But because I do think the birdie average is going to be there, maybe the safer bet is to take an over on bogeys, right? To kind of hope that he's missing greens, maybe can't luck sack it getting up and down as much, and taking that as a potential fade. So I'm going to put that in for right now. Again, we're probably not going to commit to an entire slip here on the stream, but I do at least want to give you guys a few leans to take, or at least a few leans to consider for your exposure. So let's go over here to the event averages, and now I want to look at the flip side, right? So if I'm going to bet against somebody, iron play rate is something that you can use as an indicator. If you're going to bet on somebody, a good indicator to find a reason to bet on someone would be the opposite, right? Really good iron play. So Tony Finau, obviously hitting the ball beautifully. Bryson, you can see hitting the ball beautifully himself. Now, I think Bryson is one of my favorite targets, period, this week. So he's probably a good target for that. And we could also throw in potentially a Joaquin Niemann. So let's see what they have up for Niemann lines. Sorry, not Niemann, it's Niemann. So 60.5, that's a tough one to want to bet. Yes, see, this is the issue, right? Like these, it's hard to even find something that you'd want to bet on, like an under on strokes or anything with Niemann. It's because these lines are just way too optimistic. Let's look at Bryson, and we can look at Finau too. So yeah, these lines on Bryson are also a little bit too optimistic if you were to ask me. And then the last one was Finau, right? Tony Finau. Oh, yeah, so like I can't even find like plays that I want to take for these good ball strikers, because like 60.5 strokes is just way too much, right? For comparison's sake, right, over here on Prize Picks, if you wanted to bet Tony Finau, you'd have to take him at the same number. When we get sportsbook odds to compare to, I can guarantee you that he'll be at like 69.5, right? He won't be at this 68.5 number. which is just, it makes it tough to want to go out there and take those props. So we're probably not going to be able to find very many supportive stance plays to play over here. So maybe we try and find another fade to go with. So another way you could go out there and try and find fades is to find guys that are just putting way over their head, right? Something that is maybe not repeatable out there for the next day. So Sahith Theegala is putting way above his baseline. Shane Lowry is too. And believe it or not, Shane Lowry has been putting horribly lately. So I have a hard time thinking that's going to continue. So I think Shane Lowry is like a perfect spot to potentially look at for a fade. So let's see what we've got. We've got him at 4.5 birdies, which that feels like a pretty decent spot. He's at 69 strokes. We could also take his fade for bogeys again, right? That's always on the table too. So in terms of doing a comparison, let me see what his lines are on Prize Picks here. Oh my God. This is why I hate having to I don't want to unplug my mic while I'm trying to type here. So they have nothing up for Lowry, I guess, which is kind of disappointing, but I guess, you know, they can't post the entire board yet before the cut line has happened. So 4.5 birdies feels like a decent fade. If we went with another 1.1x, we get a pretty decent payout on these two. But even if we went with something like an under on birdies, this would pay out 3.03x. So I'm not going to commit to taking this one quite yet, right? Just like these three over here, right? Check out my Patreon page, right, to see what I actually end up going with for tonight. But these would be the main two leans over here on Underdog. Let me catch up on chat. If there's anything to talk about, we'll do it. And if so, if not, I should say, we're going to hop on out of here. The whole 18 stuff was free. That's for sure, right? We hit every single one of those. I'm going to wait to play any of those until we actually see the golf course, because that's how we got it today, right? I saw that they were just hitting the ball a mile down hole 18. Tomorrow, if they're doing it again, fire up some overs, right? We'll find some guys to take overs on. If it's playing into the wind, which is also possible, right, then it'd be the opposite. So definitely was free today. It'll be a -1 cut. It's about a 99.9% chance. Let the big dog eat. You know it. What's going on, Ran? Hopefully you're having a solid night. And of course, any birdie or better matchups I like. I'll bring up the board, but I don't play birdie or better matchups. It's a category I pretty much refuse to look at because it's extremely variant, right? It's strokes that is variant enough, but when you start talking about birdies or better, right? I mean, you could have somebody shoot -2, right, but make 9 birdies, right? Perfect example. Brooks Koepka had like 9 birdies today and shot -3, right? Like, you know, if it was a strokes matchup between him and then somebody like a Scotty, for example, right? Scotty would have blown away Brooks Koepka, right? But in a birdie or better matchup, right, Brooks Koepka would have actually beaten Scotty Scheffler today. So it's a little bit tough for me to want to get to these sort of props unless there's a massive misprice. So let me know if there's any matchups that you want me to like give you a take on, but I'm not going to go through all of them. It's a board that I frankly don't even look at most times. Bogeys at 1.5 for Xander and Kawa. So yeah, like that's what I mean. At 1.5, you could take some overs. Now, I wish it would have been like scrubs, right? That we could take those fades on. But even those sort of guys, right? I'd probably be leaning on an over. Now, if we had to choose between those two in particular, let's just take a look at the shots gained metrics. So you've got Colin Morikawa at that number. He's been very balanced this week. I do have to say this short game stuff for Colin Morikawa probably feels like he's playing above his head. And then Schauffele was the other one, right? Schauffele kind of feels like he could probably keep this going over 4 rounds. I'm going to say that Morikawa would probably be the better fade out of those two. Is Brooks going to win this thing? I hope so. He's got a lot of work to get done though, Todd. So we'll have to see. Keegan for a weekend run. I like him for Showdown. So he's hitting the ball well. So I'll just show you, like, look at these shots gain metrics for Keegan Bradley. So he's -6. He's getting a bunch on approach, a bunch with the putter. Sorry, off the tee play, I should say. Out there over the first 2 days, and then losing short game, right? So if he can get a putter work in, watch out. Keegan Bradley can make a bunch of birdies. If Scotty doesn't win, you hope Bryson takes it down. For me, it goes Scotty number 1. I'm rooting for him now over anyone else. 2, Brooks Koepka, because I have a big old bet on Brooks, right? So I got to root for him. Bryson's probably number 3 for me, though. So I'm right there with you, man. Is Will Zalatoris a fade candidate? Let's look at the stats, shall we? So he's, like a couple under par at this stage. Let me find them on here. So not really. He's been gaining with the approach play. He's been okay off the tee, right? Just like a slight gainer there. And then about neutral with the 2 short game category. So, I mean, you could still fade him, right? Especially if you find a line that you think is, decent value. But the shots gained metrics aren't horrible, right? They're not like somebody that's playing above their head or something like that. So I don't know if I'd call him a fade candidate, but you could definitely find some fades. You called Bryson going off. That's good stuff. Yeah, he's good for the long courses, that's for sure. And you having bets on Brooks and Bryson, so those are also your top 3. Exactly. So there you go. All right, we're rooting for the same guy. So hopefully we have ourselves a weekend. Hatton for 2 bogeys. I don't hate the sound of that. So what is he? Over here at 2 bogeys or worse. He's a very erratic player. I took him for over 2.5 today, and I think he ended at 2. Maybe he ended up getting the 3 bogeys by the end of the round. I honestly don't know. All I know is that the pairing I had with him was absolute horseshit, so it didn't really matter what ended up happening with Tyrrell Hatton today. And if you're wondering what the other prop was that I took, it was an under on Tiger Woods strokes. So that was dead by hole number 2. So that's why I wasn't really tracking Tyrrell Hatton much today. But yeah, 2 bogeys. Yeah, I'd consider that over. I think there's a lot of push equity at 2, though, right? With somebody like Tyrrell. So if you're playing them, use them in like a 3-man or more, right? So that you're not getting like a complete refund out there at 2 bogeys. But if you're okay with the refund rate, a 2-man is probably not the worst thing either. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for this live stream. Like I said, I wanted to hop out of here a little bit sooner than usual, just because I'm feeling a little bit under the weather tonight. But hopefully you guys got all the information that you guys need for Saturday and are ready to get after it for moving day. As I said before, make sure to check out my Patreon page if you want all the spreadsheets that you see throughout my content to get my player pool projections, ownership out there for Saturday to go out there and use for your own process. Of course, as well, the Patreon is where I post all my prop slips. So if you're looking to go out there and tail all the action that I'm entering for Underdog and over there on Prize Picks, Pick 6 as well, make sure to go ahead and check out that Patreon. But that's all I've got. Like I said, gonna try and rest up a little bit, get ready for tomorrow. And best of luck with all the exposure that you're getting to.